Welcome to SoulFull Sessions Live. My name is Jennifer Mackey, and for about the last 20 years, I've had the unbelievable privilege of working with healthcare teams and education, and working with individuals and entrepreneurs. And really, my focus is about inner leadership. So those things, it's about my background's in communications, but it's really about those things that allow us to communicate better within ourselves so that we can communicate better with the people around us, whether that's a team or our families or our communities, and then how that translates into how we better serve in the world. And so the Soulful Sessions is born from a few things: my professional background. I also am most privileged to be married to a man on this call, Todd Mackey, and we have two extraordinary young men as boys, our beautiful sons. And so through the years, we actually homeschooled, or what we called life school, and we started something called the Mad Hero Project. It was really from my leadership days and then translated into me in parenting. And so Todd and I, together with our boys, launched this Mad Hero project. And it was about cultivating that element of heroism within ourselves, and then how we cultivated that and honored that in our family, and then how that translated out into the world and how we served our communities that we lived in. And so the soulful way, the reason why I mentioned that is the soulful way is just a flowing on of that. And I wrote a book this last year called Just One Soulful Thing. And really, as we age, we learn these great lessons and we deepen our practices. And so, really, for me, all that idea of heroism really begins in the soul. And so, really, the soulful way is focused on every aspect of our lives. It's not for one particular audience. It's how it translates that soulful focus, that purposeful living, and how it translates into how we connect with our partners, how we parent, how we connect in relationship with strangers, how we connect with our communities, and how we serve through whatever our business or our purpose is, or how we creatively express ourselves in the world. And so we have acronyms. I'm a writer, so I love, the wordsmithing, and I love acronyms because it helps us to remember. So we're working on soul vibe and developing our soul vibe. And so we've been working through what those letters mean and how they translate into our lives. So we focused on the last few weeks have been about wild attunement. It's been about radical trust. Last week was about the S in soul vibe, which is stillness. So you can see all those recordings. They're all listed. You can connect with me, send me a note. I'm happy to send them to you. This is all free. In the world, I normally get, paid to be able to do workshops and talks in the world, but I really feel like our world needs a little bit more of this right now. And so today we're talking about the O and the L in soul, and that's openness and listening. And every week I put out a newsletter on Tuesdays at about 5 o'clock. And then that kind of sets the tone for the week, so you can connect with that newsletter. It's free. It talks through some of these concepts. It gives questions, because really the whole modus operandi of the work that I do is about you connecting with the guru, or that soulful element of you that is very wise and has all the answers for you. And so that newsletter sets the tone for the week. And then we meet on Sundays live at 10:30 to be able to talk about those concepts in deeper form. And so we're talking about openness and listening today. So we think we're open, and we are, and we think that we're listening, and we often are, but there's levels of the understanding with regard to that. And as I was thinking about what I would talk about today, stories in my own life, because these concepts have been ruminating and flowing in my heart and my mind for years and years. And I've been kind of paying attention and being open and listening and watching for how these things unfold in my life. And so it all started for me quite young. For those of you that don't know me, a really dear friend of mine at 16 years of age died in a car accident, and that kind of set the tone for me understanding the fragility of life, and it changed everything about the way that I lived. In having those experiences of loss at a young age, and I lost 6 friends between the age of 16 and 26 for various reasons. And so I felt like I wanted those friends to live vicariously through me in some way, that I would learn lessons from the loss that I experienced in that, and all of their loved ones experienced, and how I would live my life to the fullest, because I really understood that there's no guarantee of tomorrow. And so I lived as if I had 6 months left to live, and that really was it's been both a blessing and, a little bit of that curse that you have to deal with because you wanna focus on being in the moment and you don't wanna be thinking about the end. And so to turn that into the positive, I looked for ways in which I could serve with my experience. One of the experiences I did have was after those friends passed, each one of them came to me in a dream. And I didn't grow up in a mystical environment, but I've come to appreciate that. But each one of those friends not only came to me in a dream after, but they actually had a message for me before they passed. And I didn't really kind of assimilate that or kind of come to terms with that until I was much older and to think about it. But it did drive me to want to do something with people that are experiencing loss. And so when I lived in San Diego, California, I promise this ties back to openness and listening. Um, when I lived in San Diego, California, I decided that I would volunteer my time with hospice at Scripps Hospital in San Diego. And we did an 8-week program, and I was thinking about openness and listening. I headed into that experience at 29 years of age. It's about 28, 29. And I headed into that experience of hospice volunteering with an idea that I really did listen, that I really was quite compassionate, quite empathetic, and I had much to learn. And so when we were doing our hospice training, it was 8 weeks. And when I entered into hospice, our volunteer coordinator, Emmy Steineman, when I sat down with her, she said, "So, why are you here? Why do you want to volunteer in hospice?" And I told her the experience of the past and the loss that I had had and really the peace that I had around moving beyond the veil. And I just wanted to find a way to give back in that, and I wanted to help people in that experience. And she said, "That's amazing because you don't choose hospice. Hospice chooses you." And she said that every single one of the volunteers that she had ever worked with and experienced that was the case. And so you go into this 8-week program, and I felt like I was really called. We sat in the room, on one of our first days, and Emmy started off and she said, "I want you to all come to terms with the fact that you are enough." And we hear that a lot now these days. You see it on the internet or there's a meme about it or "you are enough." And we all heard it and we nodded. And then she said, "No, no, I really need you to understand that you are enough." And we all acknowledged and, nodded and smiled and kind of sunk in a little deeper. And then she said, "No, no, I need you to pause and really hear me that you are enough." And she did it about 6 more times to the point where we were kind of all like, did we not get it? Are we not hearing it? And she didn't explain why she was saying it so much, but we tried to absorb it. And I tried to, as I was the youngest person in the room, and I tried to absorb it. So I got assigned my first family. And this is a story I've had to work through the years because I felt like I was in a good place. I felt like I got that I was enough. But I headed into my first experience, and it was a husband and wife. The wife had a brain tumor, and she was ill, and she was in bed. And for those of you that don't know about hospice, you are only in the category of hospice if your loved one or that loved one has the diagnosis of 6 months or less to live. And so it's a very tender time in people's lives for certainly loved ones that are experiencing the death of someone they care about, and the person that is going through that themselves, coming to terms with the end of life. And so I headed in, and I was very happy to support. And I headed in that night, and I had a talk with the husband. He poured me a cup of tea, and we sat around the table and we talked. And this was our first meeting, and I asked him all about, his past and how he met his wife, and we started to really talk. We had such a beautiful heart to heart. He pulled out photo albums and showed me pictures of his wife and he growing up and the children, and he poured out. It was one of the most extraordinary, deep, and incredible moments of my life. And I'm wondering, maybe just send me some hearts because it just said my internet's unstable. So I want to make you can still hear me and see me, maybe send me a message or give me some hearts, folks, to just let me know I've still gotcha. Can you hear me? There we go. See the heart. So I was sitting around the table and with this beautiful man, and we had this wonderful connection. And so I walked away feeling incredibly peaceful, that I had really served, that I had shown up and I'd had the privilege of being welcomed into this man's world. So the next morning, I got a call from Emmy, and she said, "Oh, dear." She said, I understand that you had a lovely connection with this man last night." And I said, "I did. Oh, Emmy, it was incredible. I feel like I really was able to be there for him." And she said, "Sweetheart, I have some news. And I hope that you can hear me in the most tender and loving way. But he has asked for you not to come back." You could have blown me over with a feather. This is like 30 years ago, and I still feel my heart just feel wrenched. And I was shocked. And I said, "Oh, my God, what did I do? What did I do?" Because I felt like it was so beautiful. And she said, "Honey, do you remember when I said you are enough?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Sometimes when we ask questions, when we feel like we have to fill the space, when we dive in too quickly to know, a person can pour their heart out to us and then they feel too vulnerable, too fast in our space." And she said, "I need you to remember in the future, because I'm going to assign you your next family. I need you to remember that you're enough. You let them lead. You listen more than you ask. You listen before you talk, and you say less." I think you can imagine that changed my life forever. So I headed into my next family, and it was a woman who had emphysema. She was a couple of months away from passing. I sat with her husband. I went every week while he would go grocery shopping. I did not ask a single question. I let him talk. He didn't say much for the first number of weeks. I was with that family for about she was probably about 3 or 4 months, actually. And I I just listened. I just I just sat. I got comfortable with silence. I let him lead. And every week I would show up and he would have made zucchini bread or he would make banana bread and he would leave it for me. And when he would go shopping and then he would come back and he would quietly have a cup of tea and zucchini bread and banana bread. And for a whole month, he would ask me about my life. And about a month in, he started to talk a little bit about his family. And then a few more weeks in, because he let it there, he talked more about his experience. He shared about his wife. It took time. Over 3 or 4 months, he opened up his heart to me in a way that he felt comfortable. I learned to be quiet. I learned to be open to the lesson that I am enough, and I opened myself up to listening in a way that I had never known before. At the he invited me to the funeral, and I was overwhelmed that he would even invite me into his family, very tender, very personal experience. And I say this with deep gratitude, and I hope it holds a lesson for you in this listening and this being open. But I walked into the back of the church and I came quietly into the back. I did not want to disturb. I just wanted to honor the fact that he had invited me. He was up, greeting people. The service hadn't started, but he was up greeting people. And when I walked into the room, he said, "There's our angel." And he invited me to the front of the room and he introduced me to all of his family and friends. It was profound. It taught me so much about allowing people to be who they are, allowing people the grace of space and the grace of silence. And you can tell that it's still, after all these years, it's such a tender thing to share. But I think that we oftentimes think that we're open and we think that we're listening. And we want to believe, or we understand logically, that we are enough, but we really are enough just as we are, just in our way, just in our ability to hold space for people. And so in that experience, I realized that a lot of times, and since then, in much lighter circumstances, I've come to just observe the fact that we have these preconceived notion glasses on about experiences that are happening to us, about when someone's speaking our impression, or we have a judgment around what they're saying. And sometimes we think that we're being open, but we're coming in with all these experiences and ideas. And especially working in communications, I understand that a lot of times the disconnect is that people really haven't heard one another. They haven't been open to listening. They come in with their idea of how things should be in business, in relationship, in parenting. We come in with these ideas and these preconceived notion glasses on about what the situation is about. We're judging what a person's saying, or we're trying to assess. We have our very strong opinions and ideas, and we can head in thinking that we're open and we're listening, but we really need to do a check in our spirit. I think that some of these conversations are really important around this season because holiday season, we're usually listening to a lot more people. We're in the presence of a lot more people. It's harder to be open sometimes when there's a scurry and, the intensity of the world that we're in and the holiday season and all that craze that it brings. So heading into situations, asking ourselves, am I really open to hearing this person? Am I really listening to this person? Is what I think about the situation true, or is it true for me? Seeing and hearing a person with fresh eyes, with a fresh perspective, and leveraging silence for the learning experience that it is. See what happens when you put that intention into your week. I'm really going to be open. I'm going to be open to seeing this and hearing this in a new way. I am really going to be open that I may not understand all the things going on in this situation. And I'm going to be quiet and listen. And I'm going to remember that I am enough just in being there, just in showing up. And sometimes, often more, by being there in the quiet and deeply listening and honoring space. So when we come into this place, excuse me, when we head into the world and we feel open and we're really listening, we can love better. So I have another little story for you. This one gets shared a lot as I MC weddings. I had a professor when I was in university, and his name was Peter Nels, and he was a character. He was one of those, I think, he was Welsh and he had these corduroy jackets, the beautiful like suede elbows. And he had his salt and pepper hair and, his goatee. And he would come in and he loved to shock us and just kind of, bring up a topic. From him, I took the courses Aging, Dying, and Death and Human Sexuality. And he was a character. So we would sit down and he would often, present a topic and we would all nod and roll our eyes and go, okay, Peter, what's this about today? And so he walked in one day and he said, okay, so today the lesson is on canned peaches. And we were all like, okay, Peter. He said, so I've been married for 30 years. He said, for the first 10 years of my marriage, every time I got sick, my wife would serve me chicken soup. And chicken soup was like it was her love for me. She loved chicken soup. That's what made her feel warm and feel like she was on the mend. And so she would serve me chicken soup. And he said, and 10 years into our marriage, we were at like a family event, Christmas dinner or whatever. And for whatever reason, this idea, I'd probably been sick. And the topic came up between my wife and my mother. And my wife said to my mother, so what what makes Peter feel like when he was a little boy, what made him feel better? And she said, canned peaches, chilled canned peaches from the fridge. That's all he needed. It made him feel like he was on the mend. It was his favorite thing. And so he said, my wife came to me and said, Peter, we've been married for 10 years, and you have never told me that chilled canned peaches makes you feel like you're on the mend when you're sick. And he said, well, but chicken soup makes you feel better. So I know how much love was in that chicken soup. And she goes, do you even like chicken soup? And he goes, no, not really. And I particularly don't like it when I'm not feeling well, but I know how much love you felt for that. And so he said, so for the last 20 years of our marriage up until this point, when I'm sick, my wife serves me canned peaches, chilled canned peaches. And so when I tell this story at weddings, the couple gets canned peaches wrapped with bows and ribbons to put in their cupboard to remember, because Peter Nelson's message was, when we really truly love someone and we ask them what it is they love, rather than projecting onto them what we love, that is real love. Think about that for a minute. How many times do we head into a situation thinking we know what another person wants instead of asking them what they truly want? That is being open to something different, something alternative to what we enjoy, alternative to what we think is what makes us feel better or what makes us feel joy or what makes us feel comforted. And it's listening, it's asking, caring enough to ask the question. And Peter said, imagine a world in which we ask people what their canned peaches are. So I started asking that. I took that class when I was about 25. And since that time, as I said, I've emceed a few weddings and talked about that story. I think there's quite a few couples who have the canned peaches in their cupboard. I hope they're utilizing them wisely when they open it up. It's that little trigger and reminder about, have I asked my partner lately how they really feel about this or what they really love about that? I've taken it into the boardroom with my teams. I actually go around the room and I ask, I tell the story and then I ask them, what are your canned peaches? I am often amazed by the answers, and it is not what I would have thought they wanted. When I was a camp director, just a little side note, but I was a camp director for a time before I took over the communications department for Easter Seals of Ontario. And I was working at the camp, and all these young people came in. I'd hired a team of 75, and I had the senior team, and we would do these team meetings. And so I brought them in and I said, okay, so told the story. What do you can peaches? And one gal said, those nerds, that you got and you ate, in the 80s or whatever, we used to get these nerds. She goes, I don't know, there's something about them. Every time I eat nerds, I feel so happy. So she never came to a meeting where there weren't nerds being served. Another guy, it was Coke, right? Like Coke in the fridge. So I would serve nerds and Coke to these folks. Another guy, the beautiful, administrative guy, he said, I really appreciate flowers. I just love flowers. If you feel like I've done a really good job or, you're feeling appreciative, I love flowers on my desk. Guess what? He got flowers. These are not the things I would have imagined for any of these individuals. And in board meetings, a lot of times, I just did a workshop a little while ago for Peace Arch Hospice. And so we talked about this. Everybody went around and talked about how they feel appreciated. And so oftentimes it was a note or a genuine compliment or an email or a text that just acknowledged where I was at. And so I encourage you this Christmas, this lifetime, ask people what their canned peaches are. What do they truly love? What makes them feel appreciated? What makes them feel uplifted? I think you might be surprised with the answers. And so when we can hear and we know we're enough, hi, those of you that are joining. I just see a few more popping in. Welcome, welcome to the SoulFull Sessions Live on Sunday. I'm Jennifer Mackey, and I am wildly honored to have you here. We're talking about openness and listening, the O and the L of Soul Vibe, which is a series that we're doing just to keep us more tapped in. And I see that Logan joined too. Welcome, welcome. I'm always excited about your energy, my dear friend. So, when we can listen within, when we know we are enough, when we care enough about the people around us to ask them what they truly love, and we are open and we are listening, we then attune ourselves to a different frequency. And that frequency is attunement to those around us, but most importantly, the voice within us that guides us in the questions that we ask, in the way that we approach things, and the fact that we constantly refresh. I talk about this a lot, but this is not a one-time thing. The reason why 20 years later I am still facilitating workshops, talks, I'm still writing about soulful approaches, listening within, mindful practices about just this, about, with my book, Just One Soulful Thing, just this is about present moment living. Just one soulful thing is how we approach life, how we develop our businesses, how we parent, how we listen to others. So these concepts aren't a one-time thing. This is something we evolve and grow in constantly because we all need reminders. And as I say to my clients, you're never going to be centered 24/7 unless you're a guru in lotus position on the top of a mountain or you live in a monastery or a convent and you spend your life meditating. You are not going to live there all the time. You're human, which makes you, beautifully wild and emotional and ups and downs, and it's a whole experience we're here to have. But what we can do is understand a centered state, understand what it feels like to be grounded and centered and soulful. And we are attuned enough to know when we are not centered, and the space between when we get it that we're not centered and becoming centered gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And we have practices to get us back there quicker. So this soulful way, this thing I'm flowing with, and the SoulFull Sessions, it's all about tips and tools and practices and rituals and conversations that keep top of mind these ways in which we can recognize we're off kilter and we are off center and we are not grounded. And we can see what it's like to be that. And then we do the practices and we get closer and closer to being centered again. That helps our own lives to be fulfilling. That helps our loved ones to feel cherished. That gives us an enriched, joyful life. So this idea about knowing that you're enough, being able to ask people what they truly love. Now you're cultivating this idea of truly listening within to that wild, beautiful whisper that is innate within you that has all the wisdom you could ever need. Lovely resources, videos like this. There's lots of different resources out there, books we can read, people that have, concepts or ideas about what you can apply. Become still and quiet. Be Listen deeply to your own voice first, because then you'll know where to go, what to do. And I followed this voice to 4 different countries of living all over the world because I always lived as if I had 6 months left to live. I've now settled a bit more now that I have my beautiful husband and my children. But life is a game to be experienced. So this next level of being open and listening, now it opens us up to the signs in the universe, up to God, Jesus, Buddha, you, whatever your way is. That source, that energy, there is something greater. There's something greater that is caring for us and cradling us and cheering us on. And that voice within us connects us with that divine energy, with that voice, with that wisdom. And it always, how we know it's not the one in our head that's rattling on and on. We know that it's that soulful voice because it always speaks of our good. It always wants the highest intention for us. It's loving us along our way. And when we can listen and be open, we can see the signs and we can play. And even if none of it were true, even if none of it were true, even if God didn't exist, even if there wasn't an energy that existed, when we open ourselves up to the signs and we feel joy and we feel love, Why not just play along? So for me, it's a very soulful, spiritual, beautiful experience. But these signs are there. And those of you that have experienced them, I know a few people on this call, we've had lots of conversations about this. It is a blast when we open ourselves up to the signs. It can be soulful. It can remind us that our loved ones are still with us. It can be inspiring and keeps us motivated. So, side note story. When my father passed away, he was a wonderful man. He's a wonderful angel in my life. He passed away in 2018. And I actually, because of the privilege of having worked with hospice and been a volunteer and had that experience at Scripps Hospital in San Diego, I actually was honored with the fact that I could work directly with the hospice team while my dad remained at his beautiful place at Birchmere, and I could work with the hospice team and administer my father's medication, and I could work with them to be able to help my dad so that he could remain there and until he passed on, and I was with him as well as my beautiful sisters and my stepmom. We were all in this environment when we got to see him through to the other side. That is a whole other soulful session. Ha When my dad passed away, I felt untethered. He was the first man I ever loved. Thank God I married a man that in his own right is beautiful and extraordinary, but he has those soulful qualities of my father. And I was untethered. And I really grieved. I had been through a lot of loss, 16 people between 16 and 26, plus my mother had passed away, and I'd had other friends, aunts, uncles that had passed away. But something about my father was just untethering. And I felt really lost for a bit. And I had young kids at the time. This was just in 2018, so our boys were small, and I wanted to engage in the world. I didn't kind of melt and let the grieving process happen until after I came home from the celebration of life because, I put together the slideshow. I gave a eulogy with my sisters. We sang songs. We had this beautiful experience. But when I got home, the grieving began, and I needed to work through that. And so I woke up one morning and I said, Papa, I could really use a retreat because every place I've ever lived, I find a retreat center. And we had just moved to BC a month after my dad passed. And I felt that little voice inside me. And I opened up my phone and right popped to the screen this place called Rivendell. And I knew it's called the Hermitage. It's a silent retreat. You stay in a 10 by 10 cabin with a little hobbit wood stove. It just called to my spirit, and how that place was even built and the land that was donated and everything was all about signs and open and listening and just wild divine magic at play. And so I decided I would go on this retreat. I reached out to them. I sent a message and they said, we'd love to have you. And they gave me the dates. And so I got on the ferry and I drove off the ferry. And my father's name was Charles Wortman. And he was much in my heart and spirit. And I felt the presence of him all around me. It felt very aligned with what experiences I had had with my own father at our own cottage, or he and I going on camping trips, or the beautiful adventures that we would go on when we got completely lost and we would laugh about the fact that we were on some surrender adventure. And I got off the ferry and I drove off the ferry and up the hill. And I looked to my right and the street name was Charles Lane. I don't know if you're as gobsmacked as I am in that, but I was like, of all the names, of all the roads in all the world, there it is. That was one. I had a wonderful retreat. That is the place where I wrote Just One Soulful Thing. I actually give tribute to them in the front of the book. Todd and I were on a camping trip a few months later, still feeling the grieving process. And we go on a camping trip and we randomly pull off the road and we we were staying in our vehicle, our little camper vehicle, and we parked it and we went for a walk. And I felt particularly sad. Often pops up when I'm feeling, I'm really missing my dad. And so we're walking along and we go down this trail and we don't really know where we're going. And we have no idea. It's like a trail map or whatever. We come to the end and we look up and it's Charles Creek. And Todd and I just laugh about these things now. He just looks at me and he's like, "Well, hi, Dad." So this happens with numbers. It happens with little song lyrics that come about. It happens with ways in which I feel someone's presence and then I see a sign. They are everywhere. For me, if you know anything about me, threes are like this magical connection to the universe, and eights are all about abundance. Now, I am no numerologist. I just play with life. I just play. Anywhere there's a little loving sign I can open up for, I am in for it because I feel like this life is tough enough and it's challenging enough. And wherever we could get a little spark of joy or a little bit of love, I'm in. And so I'm open. And my dad was always open. There's a whole other story there. He grew up with Pentecostal ministers, a doctor, and my grandparents were a doctor and a nurse, and they built the first Pentecostal church in Argentina. And when my father got home, he left the church because it didn't resonate for him. But he was a very spiritual man. And when things would come up, like someone would get their cards read or whatever it was, he would say, "You know what, Jenny? There's more about the universe that we don't understand than what we do. So why wouldn't we just be open?" And so I learned that from him. So I look for all these little signs. This morning I woke up, as you can imagine, I'm in a different place. I wake up in a different bed. I'm prepping for a live call. I felt tired when I woke up. And I was exhausted, and actually, it's interesting. I see that there's some new people on this call, but in my history of my career, I do get paid a lot. I've built a really beautiful career, and I get paid a lot to speak in front of people and to facilitate workshops. But I felt like I wanted to just show up online and offer something to people on the regular that they could tap into. But sometimes, as you might feel if you were in this internet space, you wonder if you're talking into the void. And I'm not that interested in my own voice, quite frankly. So if I don't feel like it serves people, if it doesn't have purpose, then I feel a little bit deflated and I feel like, why am I doing this? And yet, even if there's one or two that take a little message, then I feel grateful for that. But the noise of the internet and social media, it's a lot. And so I woke up this morning feeling that. And this is about the authentic, genuine journey that we're going to share every Sunday. It's not about just everything being rainbows and beautiful, sparkly, unicorns stuff. It's about the real of life. And so I woke up this morning and I felt that little pang and I thought, oh, I don't know, maybe I should just, I'm away with my son. Maybe I should just cancel this morning. Would anybody really notice? You know? And I opened my phone and right now it's 11:11 as I say that. And my husband's the 11:11 and Logan's an 11:11 girl. And I looked right up and there's the 11:11. But this morning when I opened my phone, I hadn't looked at my phone, and I opened it up and it was 838. That was the universe saying to me, "Honey, keep going. People need you. So show up where you can, as you can, when you can, love. Keep going." We cannot have enough signs. I see your yes, Logan, and I rate you. I love it. I love sharing that with you. Wherever we can get these signs. This is really important. When I walked El Camino, I saw threes everywhere. Every time I opened my phone, it was 333 or 1233. I would take snapshots of how many times I would open my phone at random and it would be 333 because it got to this point where it was just so intense and it was just the message, you're on the right path. The other thing that I talk about in workshops is what you focus on, you start to see as well too. And so I collect heart rocks. They're everywhere in my house. People come over, I'm sure they feel, I see your little heart, Gail. I have a heart rock from Gail. I love that you get that about me. And I see yes sticks everywhere, little yes sticks on the ground. All of these little things, it's just about life being a game, us just having fun, seeing that the universe is playing with us and that we are receptive. And the more receptive we are, the more we see. So these little heart rocks I collect along El Camino, there are millions of heart rocks. I've collected heart rocks my whole life. One of the reasons I fell in love with my husband was when we were on our honeymoon. We were walking along and he had kind of trailed behind and he was hopping over a creek and he said, "Honey, look." And I turned around and he's holding this giant, like 20-pound heart rock over his head. And he's like, "Look what I found." And I was like, "Oh, it's so amazing." And then he fell in the drink. But I just love him. He's like, what he would call in Thunder Bay is he got a booter, right? Where it's filled with water in his boot. And he was holding this rock. And I take this rock on stage when I do talks and I unveil it. And then we talk about when as women, when you're pregnant, everybody around you is pregnant. When you're going to buy a certain type of car, we were getting a Jeep one time and there were Jeeps everywhere. It was all like, I'd never seen so many Jeeps. Whatever we focus on, we get more of. So we want to focus on the good stuff, right? So see the signs, feel those canned peaches. The other thing about canned peaches is when we understand that we give that for other people, I also really encourage my clients to think about their own canned peaches. What is it you really love that makes you feel uplifted? What makes you feel honored? Don't be afraid to ask for that. Talk about that with the people that you love and expect that. We need to be open to a new way of being. We need to listen deeply within and to those around us. If we are to live this life like the game of play and beauty and learning and growth that it's meant to be. So, how does this practically apply for this season? Maybe the presents that you're buying people are different than you think they are, right? Be open. Be open to what people really want this season. Be open to the strangers that you pass on the street. Offer those canned peaches. Think about what you really want and enjoy at this time of life. What makes you feel uplifted in this season? What makes you feel uplifted in this life and honored and treasured and joyful? And give yourself that. Give yourself that and talk about that with those that you love and see the signs everywhere. I would love it. For me, one of the toughest things about not being in a room with people is I can't read you. I can't read you. And I literally know this material and my way of life. I live it. And so when I talk about it, sometimes if I look at a sea of people, and this happened one time when I was doing a workshop for neonatal nurses, and I had this whole material, 7 Truths to Living Your Yes Life, and I had all the material in my mind. And as I began to talk about a particular concept, I looked and scanned through the room and I could see they were not there. And I was like, okay, let's mix it up. And I could read it and I could adapt the workshop to be able to be what they were. And we had a wonderful time. But it's hard when you're online because I can't read you and I can't talk to you. And when this is over, normally my favorite part is the lineup afterwards. When I give a talk, people come over and they'll talk and they'll tell me their stories. And I had this sign, and oh my gosh, what you said to me really struck me right then and there. And I was meant to show up at this talk at this time. And I can't believe how things align. And it was just a sign in me being here. Whatever that is, I don't get that lineup anymore. So I know that your time is precious. But if this resonated for you today, if there was some little story that sparked in you, if you have something magical happen this week, or just ordinarily beautiful, or you open in a different way, or you listen in a different way, and something comes of that, either a learning within or something extraneous that was magical or uplifting, please send me a note. I really do. I collect them. I like to share them on if people want me to share them on. I keep them private if people want me to keep them private. But your stories are much more important than me just speaking at you. I want to speak with you. So feel free to connect with our chat. Feel free to subscribe. It's all free. I'm thinking of you. I feel the energy, the magic of 8 viewers right now is beautiful. It's just like ding, ding, ding. I love that. I love that you 8 showed up today. I'm deeply grateful. I hope this served you in some beautiful way. And this season, I'm holding space for you. I'm holding space for you knowing that you're enough, that when you listen, you will know the answer, and that you deserve canned peaches, and that you are going to have a magical time over the next few weeks or the next week until we see you next Sunday. So our next theme is you in soul, and it's unify. And what we're going to be doing next week, and I encourage those that come on the regular, bring your journal, because what we're going to do is I'm going to have some questions and some ideas for you around unifying the different areas. I call it in the book, Just One Soulful Thing. I call it the 5 facets of we. So there's different ways of talking about that, but it's body, brain, heart, soul, spirit. And so when we look at those different areas of our life, how do we marry all those areas together and then find the soulful things that speak and what's calling to us from each one of those aspects of our life? If you haven't got Just One Soulful Thing, the book, please reach out. I can send you the link, or you can find it on Amazon in .ca or .com or anywhere in Europe. It's all around the world. It's called Just One Soulful Thing by Jennifer M. Mackey, and it's a simple adventure in reclaiming your wild wisdom. Thank you for joining me today. I wish I could have the lineup in the conversations, but you're in my heart, and I'm wishing you an extraordinary week, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day, everybody. Lots of love.